So, why people ask the same questions over and over again? This is actually a question and concept that I've thought about and read about in an online message board. And it was literally people debating whether or not multiple questions of the same kind should be allowed in a message forum, in an online message forum, or if there should just be one definitive question and answer, and the question should just be closed off. Now, if a question were posed, what's it like to live in Canada? Or what is love? What is love? Almost any question, even questions that are facts, can be thought about in so many different ways. And since there are so many new people, coming up all the time to answer the question, there's always going to be fresh perspectives on what people have to say. And that's my view on it. I think this is relevant today, not only because there aren't that many spaces to share ideas like there used to be, but also because it's 2024, and with what they now call AI or generative AI, comes this idea that if you ask the AI a question about something, how will it answer a question? Is it just going to give you one basic standard answer? Is it going to give a slightly different answer every time? Or will it change perspectives constantly? Like, will it randomly generate? I mean, that would be kind of cool in a way too. But, it's really unclear exactly what the methodology will be, right? In terms of how it will function. So, even with questions involving facts, right, there are so many different ways that you can say the same thing. And I don't just mean in terms of wording or in the style of delivery. I mean that you can make different comparisons or ways of explaining something you can make different comparisons that someone else has never done before. You can say something in a way that has never been said before. And we all have different experiences and points of views, and that affects what we think about, because all of our lives, we all went to different schools, right? If you were to ask someone, hey, what was your school experience like? Every single person, and I know this sounds crazy, but every single person has a different, your school was not exactly like mine, right? You didn't go to the same school I did. You didn't have the same people. You didn't have the same geography. You didn't have, even the school, the way that schools are run, the way that, every school was different. And so that affects us. That affects the story that we tell, and it affects what we learn. And in some cases, you might think it might be better or worse, but actually, sometimes you might think, well, the more strict or the more rigid the coursework was, the better. But actually, in other cases, you might find that, students who grew up in a school that was a little more lax, they may have had more freedom to think on their own, which might actually lead them to be better thinkers. Ironically, like the less schooling, the better in some ways. I don't know. See, that's why it depends. It's not so easy to say, what's better or worse. Everyone is kind of different. And so there's a little bit of, I almost feel like good things can come out of both rigidity and flaxness, and freedom, sort of this idea. And so that's why you need kind of the cornucopia, the variety of people, right? So now this is why I'm starting to come to the conclusion that, people's individual opinions are valuable, okay? They have value. I want to hear from different people, okay? I want to hear from different people because, if you ask 100 people the same question, some people, they'll say something interesting. And then and other people will say really amazingly deep thoughts. And then, someone else will say, maybe stuff that they've heard someone else say. So they're repeating things, right? And then other people, right, will say something that's completely off the wall, completely random. You have no idea what they're talking about, but whatever. I mean, it's something. And then other people will give you completely wrong answers, right? They're literally just making stuff up. But that's okay, right? If somebody is making something up, I mean, it helps you understand, right? Like, even the wrong answers have value, okay? Because a wrong answer will give you an understanding of what people are thinking about. And they also, they also help you understand why someone would think like that. Like, why would someone say that? It helps you understand what the basic the basic issues are in terms of how people, like, why are people saying something, right? It helps you understand the issue itself, believe it or not. So now, in any question, though, people are going to assume that things are a certain way. So whenever you ask someone a question, they're going to assume that it's a certain way. So, in Star Trek, right? So during the 1960s, you would see people using what the 1960s people thought that the technology was like, right? What they were used to seeing is how they would sort of visualize or project the future to be like, right? With the big sort of room-sized computers, because that's how people thought of computers. That's what it was, right? It's hard for people to imagine something that's outside of what they've already seen. And it's like that with us too, right? And so in Star Wars, for example, in the Star Wars of the early 2000s, right? That's the early 2000s, right? We see people driving around, right? Like in flying cars. If you remember in episode 2, in Attack of the Clones, they were driving cars like it's, like people drive today, right? Each alien was driving their own car. Like they were, driving through traffic in New York City. Now, in today, right, we would probably, how do you think people would imagine the future would be today, right? Like, how do you think people would imagine the future to be like today? So, today we might think of the future would probably be self-driving vehicles, right? And AI, because that's what we talk about in 2024. And that's probably what, when you watch movies of today, that's what they're showing, right? They're showing, people driving around in AI, just doing the same thing that people are talking about today. But I think people don't realize that this self-driving vehicles and AI, it might become obsolete, right? There might be something better, in the future than what we've already thought about. And then, the other thing too is, the trend might change, right? Like, perhaps in the future, they're probably going to be doing something completely different. Something that, but the only reason why we're talking about AI and vehicles is because that's all we can think about. That's all, that's what's popular today. That's what everyone is talking about. But, in the future, they might not care. They might it might become obsolete, or they might go in a different direction, right? They might not want to, they might not want to do that, right? So now, because they might find a better solution. Now, our minds are influenced by what we see, and since we all see and experience different things, that's why we always get different answers to a question, depending on who you ask. So if you ask different people, you're going to get sort of a different response depending on what their experience was, and also what happens to pop into their mind, right? So asking questions over and over again is useful, because each time you ask it, you can learn more about a topic with each new person you ask. So different people might come at it from a different perspective. And you, as the listener, you're going to get the benefit of piecing everything together until it becomes a larger knowledge base for yourself, right? So you collect everything that you've experienced. And what's interesting is that I've experienced different things, you've experienced different things. So if we, imagine if 3 people who have been studying a topic come together, they're going to come up with some pretty cool ideas, right? Because they've experienced so many things together now, or separate from each other. And then when they come together, it you you're able to share ideas, right? That you wouldn't have had separately, because like all of the years of studying, it comes together. Like we all benefit from coming together and sharing. Now, different people might come at it from a different perspective, and so okay. Now, so yeah, we already said like that different people come at it from different perspectives. Now, if I were to ask, that ongoing and never-ending discussion, so where we ask ourselves, what is love? What is the meaning of life? Okay, how do we solve this math problem with using fractions, right? Like even if you were to ask something like that, like if you were to ask, hey, can you teach me fractions, right? Teach me how to add and subtract fractions. Each teacher is going to approach it differently. Each person is going to come at it from a different way. I know I would say it in a different way. And so in some ways it might be helpful to you, or in some other methods might be helpful to other, but everyone would solve it differently. And so if you were to ask the question, what is photosynthesis, right? What is photosynthesis, right? The way that plants gather up their, the solar energy or whatever. So what is photosynthesis, right? Each time, whatever the question is, each time you ask the question, whether it's, to scientists, to thinkers, to parents, to college students, everyone is going to come up with different answers. And, you'd be surprised how often insightful questions are going to come from the most simplest of observations made by some layperson or a non-expert. So believe it or not, like people who are not experts at something can often have just interesting ways of looking at things. And sometimes you'll find like interesting ways of looking at it by someone who is an outsider. It still has some value, is what I'm saying. We shouldn't, don't shut it out. Don't be afraid to ask someone who doesn't know. And I know some people don't like that, because obviously someone can give a wrong answer, and but I mean, it's implied. Let's just be honest. Okay, so let's say, obviously, if you are going to a doctor's office, you can't just have someone who's not a doctor, answering questions, right? Like obviously, in a case like that, you want someone who knows what they're talking about. But in the case of, in a public forum, in a public place, it's implied that random people are going to be, asking questions and answering questions. And so even if somebody gives a wrong answer, somebody correcting that person can actually be a learning experience for everybody, if that makes sense. So even in those cases where you might say like what, we shouldn't let, someone who has a wrong answer, you shouldn't be in here. I think especially it depends on the environment, right? If you're in an online space, you don't expect experts to be there. You expect people who are not experts to be there. And so that's why, that's, I guess what I'm saying is to, because some people might say, and I'll be honest, some people, they used to, one of the arguments, I guess, against this idea that I'm talking about here is that, people would say that, well, only definitive people should speak on a subject, so only, experts should talk on a subject, because somebody else might say the wrong answer. And if they say the wrong answer, then, do you know what I mean? Like then, and so in other words, they just want kind of the standard narrative to be told, whatever happens to be. But the problem is that I feel like in a public forum, right, if you're online, searching for answers or whatever, like it's implied that there are going to be people who don't know what they're talking about, or that somebody might mistakenly say something. Do you know what I mean? And in all cases, like I don't think that we should allow kind of the point is, like I'm pretty sure everyone assumes that don't believe everything that you read on the internet, right? At the end of the day, people are giving kind of their views, and sometimes it's going to be flat out wrong. And okay, in those cases, but the thing is, I mean, nobody should just because somebody is saying something wrong doesn't mean that it's not a learning experience, right? It's not an opportunity for other people, or other people can come in and correct sort of a thought that happens to be popular and that tends to be said or misunderstood, right? So all of these, so it still has some value, is what I'm saying. So when you bring in people who are experts and not experts answering a question, especially when it comes to philosophical questions, but even in factual questions, it's understood that there are going to be different, that some of the, or a lot of the stuff might be wrong. If you were to ask people, hey, like where do maggots, or I don't know, any question about, how do insects form, there are going to be some people, or how do animals work, some people are going to say things that they assume are correct, right? Even though it might not be, right? An animal expert might be able to correct that and say that, no, that's actually not how they do it. But that's okay to have people, is what I'm saying. And it's important to have that, to understand that, if you're in a public space and it's implied that you're not talking to all experts, so you should assume that there are going to be wrong answers, okay? Now, the discussion, this discussion kind of, I believe, is missing, okay, from today. Because, when we talk about AI, for example, and how it's being used to answer questions, to, people are talking about replacing it, AI replacing the search engine itself, and, AI isn't really bringing us together, is it? Right? It's kind of just giving us canned and collected answers from a variety of sources, but then really we might get, it kind of collects the answers for us and gives us kind of a definitive or somewhat of a definitive answer. But, sometimes we might not want that, right? Sometimes really we want to just get answers from the masses. Even if it's wrong, we might not want a definitive answer. I know as weird as that sounds, but we might want to experience that kind of chaos and to be able to sift through and discover for ourselves, right, what might be, with the assumption that, there are things that could be wrong. And, when you think about it, I would rather ask a random person a question and see their response than read a book or some expert to tell me about it. Sometimes, I know it sounds weird, but the issue is I like that our responses to a question are affected by our experiences. And every one of us has a different life and has seen different things. So when you ask someone a question, they're giving you the totality of their interactions with this world, plus whatever idea just happened to pop into their head at the time. It's just this wonderful combination of memories that brings ideas together. And this is why the human mind is so powerful. Now, I think we should ask and encourage people to ask the same questions over and over again on different topics. Now, it doesn't have to be the same question, but I'm not saying that you have to ask the same question. I'm saying that people should, like let's say there's there's a new person that comes in, right? There's a new student, right? And they ask the same question over and over again, right? We cannot get tired of listening to people asking the same questions over and over again. That's what I'm not talking, if the same person wants to ask the same questions over and over, that's okay too, I guess. But I'm talking more in terms of, when we get tired of people sort of asking the same question. It's like every time, the freshmen in college, they always ask the same question. And sometimes these professors, they get tired of answering it. And so they just but the thing is, they don't realize that each time, if you were to ask a college professor, and I used to listen to, these podcasts from college professors, and they would have there was one college professor that would post every year, like a different lecture, right? Like the same lecture, it was the same class, but each time this professor would add different things to it, which necessarily, of course, that's what happens over time, right? We change, like how we say things changes depending on it depends on the time that you ask someone, right? So now, So that's why, when you ask something over and over again, it's just going to be different. So, if you were to ask someone, right, to write an essay about the same topic, now let's go back to this, on the same topic over and over again, I honestly think that over time, and I've tested this myself, to be honest, over time, if you were to ask the same question to someone, over time, they might write something similar, but each time you would write something different, right? Sometimes it would be repetitious, but the way that you say it and the ideas and imageries you come up with would be different each time, right? Your mood in each day, your mood is slightly different, right? The ideas that are in this video right now, right, come from a lot of the thoughts that I've had before, but the way I'm articulating it at this moment is something that just comes out spontaneously, right? And in life, the way the brain works, it is constantly saying things in ways that are spontaneous, right? That are slightly chaotic. And sometimes your brain comes up with connections that are completely unique, but somehow they work, right? Your brain is a creative creature. Your brain is the great synthesizer and rearranger. And it does it sometimes in ways that don't make sense, but also in ways that do. That's why using the power of other people's ideas when asking a question is really helpful. So, when you ask a question, right? If you were to ask me a question, when you live your day-to-day life, right? You don't plan on what you're going to say, and you don't even know exactly how you're going to say something, right? When somebody puts you on the spot, right? You don't know how you're going to respond. And yet, I think that's so powerful. I wish that we were, instead of, why do we want to live in a society where we're just giving out, the standard answer? Okay, memorize this, say this, and then, and let's just live our lives sort of saying kind of what someone else has told us to say, right? When you do interviews, right? They tell, an interview is supposed to be a spontaneous thing. And it's weird how our society turns interviews into things that are completely mechanized to the point of I don't know, it's like an exercise memory. I don't know, they're testing our memories or something. I don't know. And yet it should be more spontaneous, right? It would be better for people to truly express themselves and say say what's going on in their mind at the time, right? So another thing I want to say is that you don't just ask people, and you don't just live your life relying on other people's ideas, right? So you can use yourself as a test and come up with ideas on your own, right? So you don't have to. And let me just say, because throughout this whole thing, you might think let's just ask people, we're just going to be asking people so we can get our knowledge. But that's not the point, actually, I'm trying to make, because I actually don't believe in that either. I think there's a time to learn, but I think over time, you should eventually reach a point where you start coming up with your own ideas and you start thinking on your own. And so, and you can use this on yourself, right? So you can test yourself and do this, because sometimes, the way you come up and teach yourself how to be creative. Okay, so one way of doing that is that you can ask yourself and practice on your own how to become, how to think. Right? Because if you keep practicing, right, and ask yourself a question over and over again, you hone your skill, right? You each time you answer it, you become better at it, right? Just like just like an artist, if they kind of paint the same drawing over and over again, it might help them get better each time, right? So now that being said, the reason why, so you might ask, when we're talking about asking people questions, I'm not saying that you're just going to be taking other people's answers for the rest of your life and, not thinking for yourself. What I am saying is that instead, okay, so it's really about, I think the most valuable way that you can ask a question is when you're asking someone something that you can't possibly know. if that makes sense. An experience that you can't possibly have without, because, for example, if you were to ask a doctor, let's say, what is it like to be a surgeon, right? Like, you can't possibly know that. There's no way, you can kind of imagine it, but really, you can't really know exactly what it's like, right? Or if you were to walk up to a lawyer and say, what's the hardest part of law school? What is the hardest part of law school? And I've had friends who've been to law school and they tell me, it's a lot of reading, right? But that's not something I would know because I never went to law school. And so, another thing too would be you can't do that on your own. And that's where it's the most valuable, actually, to be able to ask, right? But how are you supposed to ask that to an AI, right? Hey, AI, what's it like to go to, what's the workload like? What was your workload like for law school? Or what is it how is it supposed to know what, there are certain questions that you can only really ask someone who's been through it. And some certain questions that you can't really think of in your mind. You can't think about it. And you have to ask someone else who's experienced it. Now, the world ebbs and flows in both unpredictable and cyclical waves. But one thing that astounds me the most is how often things can be said, expressed, and done in so many ways. Okay, there's so many ways that you can slice a cake. Okay, people need to assert their humanity. Okay, you need to assert your humanity, and the only way, and that can only happen when people realize how powerful their voice and thoughts actually are. So with every new human being that comes into existence, these questions are going to be continued to ask. Okay, there are certain questions that people are just going to keep asking. And I wish that we could do a better job of preserving these things, these ideas, and also realize the value that it has. It's so valuable to hear people's perspectives on the human living experience. And it's not that here's the thing. I think people need to stop. I think people misunderstand what knowledge and intelligence and scholasticism really is. Okay, it's not that information needs to be given to humans, as if we, but that we need to learn from the humans themselves. Okay, so let me repeat that. It's not that we are just here to take things in and that's what makes you smart. No, what makes us smart is that we need to learn from you. We need you to give to us, to the rest of the world, I guess. It's not if you're just taking stuff in and memorizing stuff, that's not, that's nothing. You haven't done anything. You've just consumed stuff, right? So now it's our brains. So that, what that means is, so let's say that again. It's not that information needs to be given to humans, but that we need to learn from the humans themselves. And our brains, so what does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is our brains are the fountains of the best that this world has to offer. So ask humans a question, right? The same question over and over again if you want. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of that. And even if it's wrong, especially, in an appropriate forum, right? If you're in some online subject, in a comment section, you don't expect expertise. So it's okay if somebody says something completely wrong. Okay, correct that person. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think anybody's going to take someone seriously. If you're not producing, if you're not in a capacity where authority is to be, implied. It's not implied. We're all just, people are just saying things, right? And sometimes people make honest mistakes, or sometimes people just don't know what they're talking about. But that's okay, right? That's part of the, we can all learn from that, right? So anyway, thanks for watching.